Hello everybody, I'm Silly. This will be part 3, chapter 3 of Susurrus of the Subdued, SOS. Izuku messed with his own hands, shifting in his seat every so often. He was currently waiting on Anonymous 265, or, as he later found out through private messaging, Inaba Tomoki, in a local coffee shop a bit away from his house. The man worked as a marketing director in the heart of Musutafu, earned a decent salary, and apparently was interested in the boy's analysis due to the fact he wanted to get his co-worker, a huge hero fanboy, an appropriate gift. Even though it wasn't exactly hero work, it was still helping someone in need. Besides, the green-haired boy had to build up a rapport online before people like heroes would acknowledge his work. Looking up as the bell to the shop rang, Midoriya shifted in his seat to gesture for the familiar guy to come over with one hand. Luckily, the description he was given matched perfectly, so he had no trouble deciphering the man from just any other customer looking for a cup of coffee or pastry. The buyer was a short, skinny man who looked to be around his 30s. He had thin, silvery hair coming from atop his head and stretching to his waist. Furthermore, Inaba had no visible quirk off of what Izuku could see, and overall, the man didn't give off a strange aura. That was one thing Izuku had been worried about, meeting up with some creep. He strolled over, a kind smile on his face as he made to sit across from the teen. Midoriya greeted the man with a friendly expression as well, shifting in his seat to adjust to the guy's gaze. Not to mention, the boy was trying to keep his nerves under control, wanting to keep up a professional facade. Inaba, correct? Midoriya inquired, forcing his timid nature out of his voice. The man nodded, reaching a hand out to shake the boy's. I assume you're the person selling the analysis I need? Midoriya took the offered hand, his grip far weaker than the guy's. You never told me your name, kid. Izuku's brows knitted together while he let go of his client's hand. The child never informed the guy of his name. What if he knew him, knew who Midoriya Izuku was? If that were the case, he'd never be taken seriously. People who already knew him found his notes creepy, their constant jeers never letting the boy forget that fact. If this man ever caught wind of the fact that Izuku was quirkless, his whole plan on using his analyses for money would be thrown out the window. After all, it wasn't like the boy could just start over. The man already knew his face. With his mind racing, Midoriya blurted out the first coherent thought that came to mind. Deku. The green-haired teen inwardly cringed as the word left his mouth, quickly trying to correct himself. Before he could, though, Inaba spoke up again. Alright then, Deku. Can I see the information before I pay ya? You know, quality insurance? Izuku nodded and moved to unzip his yellow bag that sat next to him on the booth's bench. He reached in, blindly searching for the packet till his fingers brushed across the paper envelope. He gingerly pulled it out and looked back at the man, holding it out for him. Inaba took it before unfastening the metal tie and flipping it open. He tilted the opening downwards into his open palm, gave it a light shake, and pulled the contents out. He reordered the items, putting the envelope towards the back of the stack. His eyes then scanned the pages, and Izuku's hands felt the urge to mess with something. Midoriya had made sure to make his analysis thorough, going as far as sectioning out the topics. Usually, when doing his notes, the boy didn't care about neatness, since, when it came down to it, only he had looked at his analyses till now. Never before had he shared them willingly. Pushing his hands under his thighs, Izuku licked his dry lips in anticipation. Under his lap was warm, comforting. His gaze moved to where his hands reside, leg beginning to bounce underneath the table. In his mind, it was okay for his leg to move. The man couldn't see it. If Inaba thought his work was bad, would he destroy it like everyone else? If the papers were ruined, that means he really couldn't make a profit off of them, and therefore not help his mother. 10,000 yen. Inaba spoke up, interrupting the preteen's thoughts. Deku's gaze shot up to look at him. I'm sorry? Will you take 10,000 yen for it, or is that not enough? Inaba asked, still looking down at the papers as he resealed them. Once they were back in their packaging, he looked up to the green child. I can always raise it. Izuku spluttered, pulling his hands out from under his lap to wave them in front of himself in an X gesture. No! 10,000 yen is already too much. If anything, you need to lower it, not raise it. The man raised a brow, setting the envelope down on the table. Kid, these are on the level of a full-blown pro. Why would I pay you any less? The child paused, arms coming to rest on the table slowly. He swallowed, eyes flicking between the packet and Inaba. To Izuku, his work was nothing special. It was just the ramblings of a kid with too much free time. However, if someone he's never met before, someone who doesn't know of his quirk status, is telling him they're good, maybe people only told him they were creepy and worthless because he was quirkless. Thinking back on it, his peers only started making jabs at him once that information was leaked. Even though Midoriya was only around 5 at that point, and those memories have become blurry with time, the boy can remember the praises he was given. He was complimented on how smart he was, on his good grades, his friendly nature, and so on. However, after that fateful doctor's appointment that led to his first ever heartbreak, he's been picked on. Taking in a deep breath, Deku nodded. The price is fine, Inaba-san. Great. With that, the man reached into his coat's pocket. A moment later, he was handing Izuku a manila envelope that was identical to the one he was buying, if not for its small size. Midoriya gratefully took it and clutched it to his chest, his upper body bent forwards despite the fact he was still seated, so that he was in a small bow. Thank you, sir. Tomoki huffed, swiping his hand over the table surface in Izuku's line of sight so that he'd look up. None of that. If anything, I should be the one thanking you, kid. He picked up the envelope, elbow on the table, and wagged it side to side ever so slightly. This helps me way more than you think it does. And if I'm being honest, a thank you from me won't cut it. Izuku's expression grew confused while he watched the man stand. You have a real talent here, Deku. As compensation, I'll spread the name around, get you a few more customers. He then turned to leave, giving a wave over his shoulder and not waiting for the kid to respond. Izuku stared after Inaba, a warm feeling in his chest. He could tell his cheeks were burning from the compliment, but he couldn't help it. The man was the first person to tell him that not only were his analyses good, but that he has a prowess in doing them. Finally, getting himself together, Deku pushed the money into his still-agape bag before zipping it closed and standing to leave. Midoriya absent-mindedly dragged his pencil and patterns in the corner of his assignment. His mind was completely distracted by this morning's news, so it was nearly impossible to focus on the work given out. The number 4 hero, Edshot, had gotten into a fight that morning in central Tokyo. The pros fight was all over the news, several angles being captured. Izuku had watched a handful of the videos on the way to school, the footage being released while he was on the train. The battle was amazing to watch, capturing both hero and villain in action perfectly. However, besides the fact that the boy had gotten to watch the hero's fight patterns, he also got to watch his quirk. A client that Inaba had most likely sent his way had contacted him a few days after his first sale, asking about the number 4 hero. When Deku had asked for specifics about what the man needed, he had elaborated, stating that he needed quirk information. Izuku had gone digging that same night, trying to find at least one decent piece of footage. He had found a lot of interviews, ads, and a few low-quality clips, but nothing that he could use effectively. The videos were either too grainy, or he just wasn't using his power. In conclusion, the footage given out this morning was a godsend. Midoriya had gotten a good look at his quirk from multiple different angles, and picked it apart within seconds, questions flooding his mind. What's the thinnest he could safely make his body, and if he went past that point, what would happen? How long can he stretch until it's completely fatal? How does his organs, bones, and vital areas compress and still keep him functioning while he's using his quirk? Can he feel himself compress? Or is it just so fast he can't feel anything at all? He can take control of someone's nervous system, so he obviously can be inside a person. Does that mean... Midoriya's mumbling was cut off as the back of his head was hit so hard, his face slammed into his desk. Pain shot through his nose, eyes immediately shutting as tears welled up. The ache went up through his skull, causing the green-haired boy to drop his pencil onto the table and bring both of his hands towards his head. One came around to rest on the back of his curls, fingers encapsulated by the locks. The other was brought up to cup over his nose. Distantly, he heard the all-too-familiar sound of someone telling him to shut up, but the pain in his head was enough to make it fade into the background. Not to mention, the fear in his racing heart was clouding his mind. The feeling of blood trickling out of his nostrils was added to the pile of sensations. It seeped between the cracks of his fingers, flowing through the microscopic trenches in his skin. The boy took a moment before lifting the hand that was pushed into his hair to be raised. His head remained ducked, nose still covered. Midoriya waited for the teacher to notice him, breathing choppily through his mouth around the accumulating blood. An exasperated sigh could be heard from the front of the room. "Yes, Midoriya?" Izuku shifted his hand to uncover his mouth while his head tilted up, trying to keep the blood from getting everywhere. Due to the movement, a blood streak was left behind, going from his top lip, a few drips escaping to fall down his chin and disappearing under his hand. The teacher sighed once more and gestured towards the door. Without further incentive, the boy moved briskly out of the room, heading straight towards the nurse's ward. Izuku peeled the plaster off of his nose with a grimace, looking at himself in his restroom's mirror. The bruise that had faded marginally over the past few days had reappeared, only this time it was darker, an almost black shade. It stretched up the bridge of his nose and down the tip, fading towards the edges. Under his eyes were the start of yellow-tinted shiners that connected to the darkened area. Luckily, however, the nose wasn't too dented, just skewed somewhat. Midoriya's eyes brimmed with tears at the sight, hands shaking. He didn't know if now was the time to tell Inko, or if he could just wait. After all, he had been hiding it rather well, avoiding direct contact with her at all costs. Did the boy really want to just tell her? Get the people at Aldera in trouble? His grip on the used plaster tightened. Kachan was at Aldera. If he were to tell Inko and the school got backlashes, Katsuki might get a mark on his record. If the blonde did, then he wouldn't be able to get into UA. Furthermore, would the police even do anything? Midoriya was quirkless, and by definition, worthless. If the teachers, a form of authoritative figure, haven't stopped his peers' actions, would the police even attempt to open a case? Would they just brush it off like everyone else? Taking a deep breath, Izuku turned away from the mirror. He threw out the old plaster, reaching under the sink like he did just a few days prior. The boy pulled out the first aid kit, placing it onto the counter. He repeated the process of applying a new bandage to his nose before cleaning up and leaving the bathroom. Walking into his room, the child shut his eyes momentarily. The room was aggravating the ache in his head, the bright walls not mixing well with the shining sun entering the space through the cracks in his curtains. Trying to solve the problem, Midoriya pulled one of the thicker blankets off of his bed, moved over to the window, and draped the fabric over the curtain rod. The room was bathed in darkness, the only light seeping into the space now coming from under the door. Sighing in relief, Deku migrated to his desk. He pulled out the newly bought notebook entitled Hero Analysis for the Future number 13 and sat down. His free hand reached to the laptop before pushing open the lid. The screen began to cast shadows across his face, the light slowly fading the further into the room it reached. The boy's fingers glided across the keys, typing in the password with practiced ease. The fans in the old system buzzed loudly, cooling the insides in order to keep it from overheating. Along with the whirring of the blades was the clicking noise of the old hard drive working. The cacophony of sounds mixed together to create an almost calming hum. Once the login page disappeared, the room was bathed in a white light that caused Midoriya to wince, pain rippling through his skull. His eyes remained squinted while he moved to turn the brightness down, and, even though it was only there for a few seconds, he kept it lowered. Reorientating in his chair, Deku got ready to start his analysis, pulling up the news feed from this morning. Bonus scene. Izuku stepped off the train, gaze downcast on the newsfeed playing on his phone. The boy's earbuds relayed each sound into his ears, the noise of battle ringing out through his head. Edshot's fighting style was amazing, to say the least. When fighting, the man stuck to a mix of martial arts and his power. He'd thin out his body to avoid attacks or to disappear to the naked eye. If he chose to disappear, he'd then reappear in a spot that his opponent didn't expect. Furthermore, if he wanted to take down someone quickly, he would thin his body to a microscopic point, protrude their skin, and attack their body from the inside out. Midoriya couldn't help but mumble as he watched the fight on screen, hand coming up to pinch his bottom lip to remind himself to at least keep his voice down. The hero twisted mid-air, his upper half unfurling like a ribbon in order to avoid a punch from his opponent. The villain growled, fist relaxing and fingers outstretching to try and make a grab at the hero's now thin body. Instead, however, Edshot's still fully intact legs pushed off the ground, causing him to jump back. With the given time and space between the villain, he reformed his body and readjusted his stance. It was right as the number 4 hero was about to take down the villain with his ultimate move, Ninpo, that Izuku felt himself bump into something. The boy let out a small grunt, looking up to expect a pole or trash bin. Instead, the young man came face to face with an elderly woman. The lady had dark gray hair that was cut into an almost bob-like shape, thin-rimmed glasses that sat neatly on the bridge of her nose, and a small black horn protruding from her forehead near where her hair parted off to the side. In one quick motion, Izuku pulled his earbuds out, letting them dangle from off of his phone, before practically folding his body in half. "I'm so sorry, I wasn't looking where I was going, I swear I didn't mean to bump into you," the boy said quickly, cheeks burning. Midoriya waited in anticipation for the lady to yell at him, only to startle as she let out a chuckle. Patting the top of his head, she spoke. "It was an accident, dearie. No need to apologize." Izuku slowly stood straight at her words, hands moving to mess with the cord of his headphones. Even though the woman said it was okay, Midoriya couldn't help the guilt that was forming in his gut. If he hadn't let his love for heroes get in the way of his attentiveness, he wouldn't have bumped into her. As if sensing the boy's unease with the situation, she pointed to the other side of the road. "If you would like, I wouldn't mind being helped across the road. You seem like a nice boy. I don't think I could ask anyone else." The kid in question nodded quickly, bunching up the cord in his hands and shoving it, along with his phone, into his pocket. The old woman looked at him with a gentle smile, reaching out a shaking arm for him to take. Izuku, once ready, hooked his arm with hers, beginning to gingerly guide her across the busy road. He kept his pace slow, matching up with her stride with ease. Furthermore, as they walked, Izuku's shame slowly diminished to a low buzz in the back of his mind. In the boy's brain, helping someone always seemed to relax his nerves. It allowed his mind to be able to focus on something else rather than his own anxiety. Once to the other side of the street, the lady gave his arm 2 pats. "Thank you. Roads like that are scary to an old bag like me. We can't really move like we used to." She laughed. "Take care now, and make sure to pay attention. No more of that phone of yours, young man. They distract you kids too much." She then slinked her arm out of his, turning to leave. Midoriya couldn't help but feel slightly embarrassed by the woman's words, warmth blooming in his face once more, although he couldn't stop the small smile from forming on his lips. He watched the woman's back retreat for a moment longer before turning to leave himself, this time keeping his phone tucked away within the confinements of his uniform's pocket. Alright, everybody, that concludes Part 3, Chapter 3 of Susurrus of the Subdued, SOS. Please make sure to check out the Discord if you haven't already. If you would like to get updates easier, get connected with people within the fanfiction community, make requests for a podfic, and more. The link to the server will be in the description. Now, I hope you enjoyed, and thank you for listening.